This is not something that you're just going to roll the dice and make a decision and kind of flip a coin and say, is this predatory and targeted violence, or is this more emotional or affective violence? We are going to teach you some things to look for in this process and show you how we determine that. So things that you've mentioned, things like penetration testing, people who plan attacks on facilities or in the workplace, they might look at where your cameras are. They might pick a time or a day where it's less crowded or maybe more crowded. The El Paso attack, for example, at the Walmart a couple years ago, the attacker there describes in great detail why they chose this particular Walmart at this particular time. Same with the shooting out in Buffalo, New York, but it was a white supremacist attack, and they chose this particular was chosen again and planned. They actually looked at population data to choose one that would have more African Americans within the store. So understanding with the predatory and the targeted violence, this mode of violence, there's a lot more planning. It's more strategic and tactical in that space. And Charlie, in the management work that you've done in the restaurant space, I mean, this is the difference between a customer or a staff member who's frustrated they didn't get the shift they wanted, they are yelling or they kind of lose their cool. That might be more of that effective space. Someone who has a perceived sense of injustice and grievance, who holds on to this, starts to think about things like, maybe I'm going to slash someone's tires. Maybe I'm going to make this person hurt like I hurt. That's what we're talking about here in this targeted, mission oriented violence. The idea here starts at the beginning. Someone is frustrated with the way they're being treated. They then say, I shouldn't be frustrated. I'm going to make that other person pay. And they start planning, they start fantasizing. What am I going to do to that other person? And as their plans solidify, we actually look at the movie theater shooting in Aurora. This is very similar. This attacker starts to solidify their plans. They take a notebook out and they start to think about what they need to carry out this attack and what different kinds of attacks are at their disposal. And when we get to that implementation phase where they have the weapon, they have the plan, and they're putting it into action, that's that very late stage piece of this. And I'll say this plainly to folks, if we're going to try to stop workplace violence by waiting until implementation, bad guy with a gun showing up to do harm, we're missing all of these other spaces. And has he ever had a gun? Do his friends have a gun? Does he play games that have guns? Does he have an interest in weapons? Does he have a plan? Has he ever shot a gun at a range that he hasn't owned? He's like, oh, okay. So we have to be curious. The phrase from the Arapaho after action report, it was a shooting in the US back 10, 15 years ago, maybe longer. There's a great phrase in that called an inquisitive, skeptical mindset. And when we're looking at threat, we got to have an inquisitive, skeptical mindset. We can't make assumptions. We really want to try to understand what was the state of mind. Are they thinking of carrying this out? Is this an emotional reaction, a fight, flight, on, freeze? They're having an emotional reaction. Or is this something more tied to a deeper sense of a plan? Is in threat. And this is a great slide to highlight. It defines the different kinds of threat. This is from our book, Assessing Threats in Written Formats. And you see these different descriptions. Is the threat direct? Is it indirect or vague? We're going to get into transient and substantive as we close out here. Understanding the qualities of the threat help us understand the actionability and lethality. Is this going to happen? Or is this an expression attempting to intimidate someone? Those are some important differentiations. When we do these violence risk threat assessments, the other thing that we're looking for is the totality of the circumstances. Is this a person who's been aggrieved? They feel like I have all these injustices. We might look at things like, is there a sense of free fall or a catalyst event? Have they been fired from their job? And then they make the threat. So I don't want to give you the impression that threat assessment is all about, is it effective or is it mission oriented? Is this a transient threat or is this a substantive threat? We're also looking at, is the person suicidal? Are they getting along with their colleagues? Do they have supports in the community? And to this end, we have some systems that we develop that help us understand some of these differences.